Before we start the podcast, we should tell you that Overlooked was created for adult audiences. It contains descriptions of violence, death, and sexual acts that might be triggering, so please take care of yourself when listening. Also, if this is your first time listening to Overlooked, go back and start with episode 1. The story is meant to be heard in order.
Last time on Overlooked.
I seen a man come running from between the houses, and he ran up to a blue car and shot the witness. It was 3 shots.
Did you recognize this individual?
No.
Golubski knew that Stacy knew who the killer was. Do you think Golubski ever wrote a report, or there's any indication that he interviewed Stacy about what she saw? Not a word.
So he comes up on the porch, sun going down. Hey, babe, how you doing? You know who I am?
He had complete license to do what he did, and he did it for decades.
It's still not over because he got arrested. He got to get convicted. Roger Golubski should pay his debt.
I'm Peggy Lowe, and this is Overlooked, a podcast from KCUR Studios and NPR's Midwest Newsroom. In this second episode, we're zooming in on the story of Lamonte McIntyre, the man Nico Quinn helped put in jail. He was just a 17-year-old kid when he was sent to prison for 23 years for something he didn't do.
There was nothing to tie me to this crime.
It took a group of dedicated people to get him out, and in doing so, Lamonte's story exposed the depths of former detective Roger Golubski's alleged misconduct. Was it bad detective work? Part of a racist, corrupt criminal justice system? Or something deeper? To truly understand all this, we have to hear about the day it all started, this time from Lamonte's perspective. On April 15, 1994, Lamonte McIntyre skipped school. He was 17 years old, and he'd been going to Donnelly College in Kansas City, Kansas, where he was enrolled in a GED program. He also had a part-time job sweeping floors at Fifi's Diner, where his mom worked. Lamonte was tall and skinny. Here's how he remembered those days during a podcast taped a couple years ago called Open Mic.
I was a family guy. I always around my family a lot, so I was just a 17-year-old kid, just trying to go through life like everybody else do.
He had spent the previous night at his aunt's house. He and his cousins then spent the day watching TV, soap operas, the new news, and a couple movies on HBO. According to family testimony, Lamonte only stepped away from his aunt's house a few times that day. Once to help his mom with something at her house from about 9 to 10:30. Another time when his aunt sent him to the store to get bread for breakfast. And another couple times when he went over to his other aunt's house, a block away, to call cabs for uncles visiting from out of town.
You don't have plans at that age. You just kind of go with the flow.
It was around 2 o'clock that afternoon when Donnell Quinn and Donald Ewing, also known as Little Don and Donnie, were shot in a Cadillac. Lamonte McIntyre was 1.5 miles away from Hutchings Street at that time. Now, 2 eyewitnesses said that the shooter was wearing all black pants, a black hat, black shoes, and was carrying a shotgun. But that's not what Lamonte was wearing that day. His cousins vividly remembered how he hadn't brought fresh clothes to spend the night at their house. They were kidding him about it, wearing the same clothes for 2 days. His cousins remember Lamonte wearing khaki pants, a black T-shirt with white lettering on it, and a ball cap. Later that afternoon, Lamonte's grandmother called him at his aunt's house and told him the police wanted to talk to him. Now, the only thing Lamonte could think of, he later testified, is maybe he missed court for a recent charge of drug possession? So Lamonte called his mom, who was working at Fifi's Diner that day. Rosie McIntyre went to pick him up, but as she drove by Fifi's again on the way to the police station, a police car was parked at the diner. So Rosie stopped, introduced herself. The police told her they just needed to talk to her son for 15 minutes.
I took my son to see what the police wanted. I believed in the system. And they said give them 15 minutes. And I did, and I didn't never get my son.
A wave of police cars descended on Fifi's diner, and Lamont was taken to the station. And here's where Lamont met the man who is central to all of the victims in this case, Detective Roger Golubski. As the lead detective investigating the double murder, Golubski began to question Lamont at the police station. Have you been in any gang fights? No. Do you know anyone who owns a blue lowrider? No. Where were you at 2 o'clock? Lamont said he was at his aunt's house. Then the officers told Lamont that one of the guys who was shot was still alive at the hospital and ID'd him, which was a lie. Lamont said he couldn't have. I wasn't there. Lamont had been surrounded by family that whole day, so you'd think he had a pretty solid alibi, right? His aunts and cousins tried to talk to the police, even going down to the station a couple times, where someone took their names, but they later testified at his trial that they were never contacted again. At 8 o'clock that night, just 6 hours after that double murder on Hutchings Street, Lamont was advised of his rights and arrested for a crime he didn't commit. And his name would not be cleared for 23 years. There were only 2 eyewitnesses interviewed on the day of the murders. You know about one.
What is your full name?
Nicole LaToya Quinn.
But there was also 27-year-old Ruby Mitchell.
Ma'am, what is your full name?
Ruby Mitchell, Ruby Ann Mitchell.
Will you spell your last name, please?
Mitchell.
She's the reason Detective Roger Golubski wanted to talk to Lamonte McIntyre in the first place. Remember what Nico Quinn said in the last episode? Just minutes after the shooting, Ruby Mitchell turned to Nico and
she said, "Oh my God, that's Lamont." I said, "I don't know no Lamont."
Ruby Mitchell was interviewed by police less than an hour after the double homicide on Hutchings Street, where she lived with her 3 sons. She'd been looking out the screen door when it happened.
Miss Mitchell, were you an eyewitness to the shooting that occurred in front of your house today?
Yes.
What's the first thing you recollect of the shooting? Did you see the party who did the shooting approach the car?
Yes.
Where did he come from?
He came from the hill across the street from my house.
There's some dirt, fresh dirt. Did he walk across that?
Yes.
And what did he do?
He came down the hill and then he stopped about halfway and picked up something. I guess he dropped the shell or something, I don't know. And then he pumped the gun, and then he came to the car and he said something to the dudes, and then he just started shooting.
Ruby Mitchell tells police a similar story as Nico Quinn.
Did you see his face?
I know he brown skin. That's how I can tell. I didn't know no scars and nothing like that.
You recognize him again if you saw him?
Yep.
The officer spent just 4 minutes with Ruby Mitchell and asked her twice, "Could you recognize him again if you saw him?" Both times Ruby Mitchell said yes. But years later, Jim McCloskey, the guy who eventually helped get Lamonte McIntyre out of prison, interviewed Ruby Mitchell about what really happened that day.
She told the police that the shooter looked like the Lamont who was dating her niece, Kiva Garcia. Lamont McIntyre was not dating her niece, did not know her niece. She had the wrong Lamont. It was Lamont Train who was dating Kiva Garcia.
And there's more. After Ruby Mitchell's original statement on Hutchings Street, Detective Roger Golubski drove her to the police station.
Roger Golubski, that very afternoon, within an hour or two of the murder, picks her up to take her downtown for a statement. And on the way downtown, now here's a woman just completely traumatized by what she had just witnessed, a double homicide in broad daylight. He told her how attractive she was. He liked her breasts, and he was wondering if she'd like to date white men. He was coming on to her.
Now, remember, Golubski was known for asking black women if they liked to date white men, meaning, of course, him. In an affidavit many years later, Ruby Mitchell said she was nervous that day and feeling vulnerable, worrying about losing her sons. "My fear was running away with me," she said.
agency to know what was going on. Is he soliciting me? Is he going to arrest me? What's he going to do? Why is he doing this? She was a sweet lady who got caught in a juggernaut. Golubski had a reputation of threatening to take children away from potential witnesses.
On top of that, the police records show that Golubski never even looked for Lamont Drain, the man who was actually dating Ruby's niece, the man Ruby thought she saw. In fact, the first person to locate and talk to Lamont Drain was Jim McCluskey 16 years later. Turns out Lamont Drain was out of town that day. But back to April 15th, 1994. Once Ruby Mitchell made it to the KCK police station, police were ready with a photo lineup of 5 pictures. That's even though police standards call for 6 photos. To add to that, 3 photographs were from Lamonte McIntyre's family. So it was Lamont, his brother, and a cousin. His lawyers later called that unduly suggestive, meaning that police were trying to get witnesses to choose Lamont out of the lineup. Then Ruby Mitchell was questioned again by Golubski's partner.
Ms. Mitchell, did you tell me after we took your statement that you almost called out a name when you saw the man run down the hill?
Yes.
And what name did you almost call out?
Lamont.
And why did you almost yell out Lamont?
Because he used to try to talk to my niece, and I knew him.
And when you got to headquarters, did we show you a series of 5 pictures?
Yes.
And were you able to pick out the shooter of the picture?
Yes.
And is there a number on that picture?
Yes.
What is the number?
Number 3.
Are you absolutely sure this is the party who did the shooting?
Yes.
And who is this party?
Lamont.
You know his last name?
Yes.
What is it?
McIntyre.
You can hear Ruby Mitchell pause there. Did you hear it? She does it twice. The first pause is just before she says she knew Lamont's last name. Earlier in the day, she didn't know the last name of the young man dating her niece. Then at the detective's urging, she says Lamont's last name, McIntyre.
And how do you know this party?
Because he used to talk to my niece.
And how long have you known him?
For a couple months.
And once again, you're absolutely sure this is the party?
Yes.
Beyond any reasonable doubt, that's him?
Yep.
Detectives ran with it, wrapping up a double murder in 6 hours, very fast for a murder case. In police records from that night, Roger Golubski marked the case cleared with Lamonte McIntyre's arrest. Lamont went on trial 5 months later, in September of 1994. When Golubski testified, he said Ruby Mitchell's identification of Lamonte McIntyre was backed up by, I'm going to use air quotes here, confidential informants, sources from the streets who also mentioned Lamonte McIntyre as the killer. As you'll learn later, that's a Golubski specialty, using these confidential informants to solve lots of cases. But Golubski wasn't the only person who put Lamonte McIntyre behind bars. He had help. Remember how a county prosecutor named Tara Moorhead threatened eyewitness Nico Quinn with locking her up and taking her children if she didn't ID Lamont? At Lamont's trial, Tara Moorhead was ready and cited case law to show the judge and jury how Golubski's use of anonymous sources was perfectly legal. Lamont's aunts and cousins testified about how he was with them that day. But Tara Moorhead peppered them with specific questions. Why didn't they remember the times more precisely? She accused them of rehearsing their stories. And Moorhead also told the jury, without offering any proof, that Lamont had a vendetta against the 2 men who were killed in the Cadillac. Obviously, some of these tactics are what prosecutors do, but there was some other stuff going on here, like how Moorhead had a previous relationship with the judge, something that was called improper by an expert on legal ethics who testified at Lamont's exoneration hearing. Lamont's lawyer tried to put up a defense. He pointed out that police didn't get fingerprints off the shotgun shells, They didn't search Lamont's home. They didn't find the shotgun. They didn't try to find the all-black clothes the shooter was wearing or even test Lamont's clothes. In fact, Lamont's lawyer said Golubski didn't execute even one search warrant in this case. Police simply relied on the testimony of the two eyewitnesses, Nico Quinn and Ruby Mitchell. In his closing argument, Lamont's lawyer said the police asked Ruby Mitchell to look at a photo lineup, and she picked out a person who looked like the Lamont she knew. But, I'm quoting the attorney here, oops, she was wrong. She picked out the wrong Lamont.
The case, the whole trial was just something they made up as they went along. They made it up.
This is Lamonte McIntyre 27 years later in 2021.
There was nothing to tie me to this crime. Nothing.
After a trial that lasted just 4 days, Lamonte McIntyre was found guilty of the double murders on Hutchings Street. He was 17 the day of the double murders, 18 the day he was convicted. He blurted out, I don't believe it. I don't believe this, man. The judge told him to be quiet and polled the jury. All 12 jurors said guilty, one by one.
I think for the most part I was shocked. At that time I did have faith in the justice system, and I knew that I wasn't responsible for the death of those two men, so I kind of expected to walk out the courtroom that day.
But as we know, that's not what happened. Turns out Lamont's court-appointed lawyer, Gary Long, had never tried a murder case. Long had also been disciplined by the Kansas Supreme Court for screwing up other clients' cases. Long was ultimately disbarred a few years later. In January 1995, Lamonte McIntyre was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. He said just 13 words. Judge, I would like to tell the court that I'm innocent. That's all. The first few years in prison were hell for Lamonte McIntyre.
Starting out, I was so hurt and angry, man, when I got convicted.
He was angry at people who put him in prison, but he hung on to his innocence, using it like a crutch to keep him steady.
So that first 5 years was like me being in I don't know, it was like a trance or a shock or something.
But then Lamonte met a guy in prison who helped him return to his faith in God, and he decided that his anger wasn't harming the people who put him there. It was harming him. So he prayed, talked on the phone to family, worked out, and read about philosophers, spirituality, and Shakespeare. He also kept up with the news as historic events passed him by. The Oklahoma City bombing, the O.J. Simpson case, President Bill Clinton's impeachment, the mass shooting at Columbine High School. And he wrote letters, sometimes asking for help.
I wrote hundreds of letters a week to all different organizations, different types of media, source outlets. I wrote Oprah Winfrey. I was writing all kind of people. A lot of people responded, but a lot of people couldn't do nothing for me.
It was in 1996, 2 years into Lamont's prison sentence, when eyewitness Nico Quinn signed an affidavit saying Lamont didn't do it. But her efforts to get him released failed, as did Lamont's own attempts to work through the legal system. But his luck finally changed because one day, around 2001, he saw an article in Jet magazine about Centurion Ministries, a group in New Jersey dedicated to exonerating innocent men.
And I had read they had just freed an innocent guy that was in for murder and robbery. And I thought that was interesting. I'm like, wow.
Lamont wrote a letter to Centurion's investigators. Here's exactly what it said. I'm 100% innocent of the crime I'm doing time for. I have been doing my best trying to prove that. I have no money, and I don't know where to go from here. So I'm asking for your help. If you could just look at my case, you would see that I shouldn't be here. And this is how Lamont first met Jim McCloskey, the man who got him out of prison.
Here's exactly how it happened.
Since founding Centurion in 1980, Jim McCloskey has helped free 68 people from prison. He's famous for it. He's been on shows like 60 Minutes. I mean, like John Grisham wrote the foreword to his memoir. Jim spent 8 years corresponding with Lamont and reading the paper trail before he decided to take his case. Jim believed in Lamont's innocence. He started work in 2009. Jim believes in boots on the ground and knocking on doors. He spent a lot of time talking to people on the streets, to the Quinn family, Lamonte McIntyre's family, eyewitness Ruby Mitchell. This old-fashioned gumshoe detective work was how Jim McCloskey heard another theory from people on the street about who might have killed little Don and Donnie. McCloskey was told by Nico Quinn that it was a then 15-year-old kid working for one of the biggest drug dealers in KCK, Neil Edgar Jr. His nickname was Monster. As we said in the first episode, Edgar has denied any involvement in the double murders and has never been charged in connection with them. So to get Lamont's case back in court, Jim hired an attorney. Together, they talked to the county district attorney about Golubski and about the prosecutor, Tara Moorhead, who had threatened Nico Quinn into testifying against Lamont.
And we went through chapter and verse on both occasions why we believe Lamont was innocent, Monster was guilty, and the misdeeds of Tara Moorhead and Roger Golubski.
It didn't go well.
He didn't take one note. He listened, didn't really ask any questions. It was quite obvious he could care less what we said or what evidence we had.
But then, in 2016, a new district attorney changed everything for Lamont. That's coming up right after this.
From the pandemic to climate change to elections, there's a lot going on in Kansas City right now. You can get it all in one place at KCUR's daily news podcast, Kansas City Today. My name is Nomin Ujiyedin, and I bring you stories from KCUR's award-winning newsroom. We cover the issues that matter to you, like housing, criminal justice, and education. You can subscribe to Kansas City Today wherever you get your podcasts.
In 2016, Jim McCloskey and Lamont's lawyer met with Mark Dupree, a 34-year-old black defense lawyer and church pastor who was also the new DA in KCK. He knew Lamont's case and had even been doing some of his own investigating. And unlike those before him, Mark Dupree cared what Jim McCloskey and Lamont's lawyer had to say. Lamont got an exoneration hearing for October 12th, 2017. It was supposed to last 7 days, but ended up taking a turn no one predicted. It was the second day of the hearing when Mark Dupree felt like he'd heard enough. He went out to lunch alone to a cafeteria in the basement of the casino across the street from the courthouse, and he ordered chicken fingers and fries.
And I only ate one chicken finger because my stomach I was very nervous, and I knew that I was about to tick the establishment off.
Dupree was planning to do something that would change Lamont's life and defy the whole political and legal establishment in Kansas City, Kansas.
I was at that point where I had gotten the itch and the, I think, gall, right? Not being afraid of the political backlash that I knew I was about to step into. And because of that, it was, in my mind, either do it now or you're going to go back into that office and someone will advise you on not to make yourself a target.
Dupree made a plan. He would go back across the street and advise Lamont's legal team to tell the judge they wanted to enter Lamonte McIntyre's entire case into evidence. Dupree told his prosecutors, don't object to that. Then Dupree would ask for it to be dismissed, a strategy that is rarely used because it means that he's overturning a decision by his own office. Before he left the cafeteria that day, he wrote up a statement to read in court. I brought the transcript from what you said. And I was wondering perhaps if you would you mind reading it for me?
I've been presented with information regarding identification of Mr. McIntyre in 1994. as the killer of Donnell Quinn and Donnie Ewing. That information, I believe, was not available during the trial, is of a nature that I believe that had it been presented to the jury in the
He called it a, quote, manifest injustice.
It is because of this information and only this information that my office is requesting the court find that manifest injustice exists, that Mr. McIntyre should be granted an opportunity for a new trial.
Usually this would result in a new trial. But instead, Mark Dupree had something else in mind. He told the courtroom,
Judge, on behalf of the state of Kansas, and as a minister of justice, and the chief law enforcement officer of this county, based off my investigation in this case, this office moves to dismiss this case.
And then he announced that he's recommending that the conviction be vacated and the charges against Lamont be dismissed. Case over. It was unbelievable. It was just such a moment of joy and relief that it's over.
How you doing, man? How everybody doing? Oh my God, how are you? I'm fine now, man. I'm good. It feels nice out here.
In watching this videotape, I have to say I got a little teary too, now that I know all these players. And you guys all sort of filed out slowly from the Wyandotte County Courthouse, and you all looked perfectly shell-shocked.
Well, we still couldn't believe what happened. Oh, my Lord. It was like a moonshot, something from Mars coming down on Earth. This never happens.
Just 1 week after he got out, Lamont, his mom, and their lawyer visited our public radio station, KCUR, to appear on a talk show. It was like a rock star was visiting. People took Lamont's picture, shook his hand, stared at this guy who had suffered so much, but who was here, smiling. Host Brian Ellison asked him, "What now?"
Lamont, here you are, you're 41, but you don't have a resume outside of prison. What are you doing right now? What are your plans for financial stability?
Well, I plan to get my barber's license because I've always been a barber. I plan to finish up my education by going to school, and I'm gonna follow my passions.
His mom, Rose McIntyre, was on the show that day too. I remember thinking that they all looked a little blown away, like they were catching up with this reality. But to this day, Rose blames herself.
The day of the crime, I took my son to see what the authorities want, and they said give him 15 minutes and I could come get my son. So from that day on, 15 minutes did not come, so I relived that each and every day of my life.
Did it feel a little like you were in a prison of your own out here?
Yes, I actually did the time with my son each and every day.
Rose McIntyre talked about her 2 nervous breakdowns. She never ever doubted her son's innocence. She'd visit him religiously once a month while he was incarcerated in 2 different prisons in Kansas. And in the years right after the murder, she even tried extreme things to get more answers, to try to get him out, like dressing up as a man at night to go into the tough part of town where the double murders happened, trying to find more information. She also made phone calls and wrote letters. The NAACP, 60 Minutes, Court TV, Sally Jesse Raphael, Queen Latifah, Montel Williams.
I didn't lose hope. I lost my nerves. I don't know how to really describe it. It was so much hurting. It was hurt. It was pain. I was doing so much to try to free my own son till I broke several times,
Now, there's another thing to know about Lamont's trial that's important to acknowledge here. Rose McIntyre knew Detective Roger Golubski because back in the 1980s, years before Lamont's arrest, Golubski pulled her and her boyfriend over one night. Rose said he made her get out of the car and threatened to arrest her if she didn't submit to a sex act. So she went to the police station the next day, as she says Golubski instructed, where she said he sexually assaulted her. After that, Rose dodged him by moving and changing her phone number. After Lamont was exonerated and released, his lawyers filed a federal civil rights case on behalf of him and Rose, seeking more than $100 million. The lawsuit said that Golubski set up Rose's son as revenge for her rejecting him. But not everyone believes this theory. Here's the original investigator, Jim McCloskey.
I don't believe that had anything to do with it, no.
Now, this is new information for a lot of people, and it shows where the case's investigator and Lamont's lawyers differ. McCloskey doesn't believe Rosie spurning Golubski had anything to do with him framing Lamont.
I don't know if he even remembered her. He had so many black women on his list. She was just one of countless.
Jim McCloskey says that Golubski just wanted to find a black kid named Lamont, called over to the juvenile division, and got the name Lamonte McIntyre. As for the neighbor who mistakenly pinned the crime on Lamont, Ruby Mitchell, she still lives in KCK, but she didn't respond to my request for an interview. Jim McCloskey says she felt terrible about the McIntyre case and asked that he apologize to Lamont and his mom for her. Lamonte McIntyre has been out of prison now for a little over 4 years. He's 46 years old, says he's playing catch-up on life. This is him on Facebook in May of 2021.
Hello, good morning, all my fellow vegans out there. Yeah, your boy vegan now.
He's actually plant-based now, that's what he told me. He's also an entrepreneur. He and his mom live in Arizona. He's got a real estate company, a barbershop, and he still has a barber academy in KCK. He also founded a nonprofit with another exoneree, Daryl Burton. Miracle of Innocence helps with exonerations and provides care for folks when they come home. When Lamont first got out, he couldn't believe how much everyone was into their phones. But now he posts on social media all the time. Mostly inspirational stuff about spirituality. He uses the hashtag, be good to yourself.
I feel good, but I ain't here for that. So every morning, I walk around, I work out, and I have dialogue with God, right? Every morning I do this, and I thought about something.
Lamont doesn't go near anger. He told me he has no more negative to give. Since his release, he's told his story dozens of times. In these interviews, I have only seen him get mad once, and it was just a flash. While speaking on a podcast in November 2020, a Michigan defense attorney asked him a question he'd heard way too many times before.
Were you involved in, had you ever been arrested before this had happened?
Nah, I wasn't, it was some stuff, not like some serious stuff like that, but it was something that somebody else had did. See, this is the place we live in, right? So instead of people looking at why an innocent person would probably go to jail, they'll look at, well, what possibly could he have done to put himself in that kind of situations.
Lamont grew a bit angrier and said that no matter what a guy is doing, he can still be wrongfully accused.
The way the system is designed, the way they got it set up, that stuff is disgusting, man. And I hear these questions all the time because this is how people try to rationalize that situation. How do you make sense of it all?
The attorney on the podcast moved along with other questions about Detective Roger Golubski and prosecutor Tara Moorhead. The lawyer said, where are they now? Lamont said he doesn't pay attention to that. He just wants to talk about one thing.
What I do understand and know is without accountability, that kind of stuff will continue to happen. It's not even shocking no more to hear about it because it's a common practice now. This is the only reason why I continue to speak.
Sometimes the only accountability the justice system allows is money, paying a person for the damage done to them, or in Lamont's case, the 23 years he was wrongfully in prison. In June, the local government of Kansas City, Kansas, agreed to settle the federal civil rights case filed by the McIntyre family. The Wyandotte County Commissioners agreed to pay Lamont $12.5 million, certainly much less than the $100 million the family asked for. and the commissioners were quick to say that they admitted no wrongdoing. But it's the largest public settlement related to a wrongful conviction in Kansas history. As for the county prosecutor, Tara Moorhead, well, she's still working. In fact, she moved up to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Kansas. But with all the news on Lamont's case and with claims that she interfered with a defense witness in another case, she's been taken off criminal cases and is relegated to just civil work. And Lamont's first lawyer, Gary Long, who was disbarred after Lamont's trial, he won back his law license in 2015, but was recently suspended again by the Kansas Supreme Court for other offenses. What happened to Lamonte McIntyre can't be undone, but Lamont's highly publicized case did expose all these other abuses of power by former Detective Roger Golubski and the KCK Police Department as a whole. And the case generated so much attention that a very famous guy even stepped into the fray.
Team Rock, the social justice group chaired by rapper Jay-Z, says they're applying more pressure to the Department of Justice, urging them again to open up an investigation looking into what they call a pattern of corruption by the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department.
Jay-Z's Team Rock took out a full-page ad in the Washington Post, and it donated $1 million to the Midwest Innocence Project, which also helped on Lamonte McIntyre's case. Roger Golubski was finally arrested by the FBI in September 2022 and charged with sexual assault and kidnapping. It's the kind of accountability activists in Kansas City, Kansas have been calling for years, and more charges are expected because the FBI is investigating a long list of sexual assaults dating back to the 90s, in addition to unsolved murders of vulnerable Black women in KCK. But will Golubski actually be held responsible? Coming up on Overlooked.
I really don't feel that Golubski or nobody will be held accountable. I feel like this is a waste of my time.
That's when Golubski came and he was like, yeah, Stacy Quinn was killed. But he was acting like he didn't know who my mama was. I used to see you with her, so you know who my mama is.
Maybe it was something he wanted that she wouldn't do or she wouldn't give him. That's the only thing I can think of.
After 3 years, every internal affairs investigation complaint was destroyed. Now, why would you do that? The only reason you do that is to protect your cops, to protect your bad employees.
Overlooked is a production of KCUR Studios and NPR's Midwest Newsroom. It's hosted by me, Peggy Lowe, and reported by me, Steve Vokrat, and Dan Margulies. Mackenzie Martin and Suzanne Hogan produced, mixed, and did the sound design for the podcast, with editing by CJ Janovi and mixing help from Paris Norvell and Trevor Grandin. Digital editing by Gabe Rosenberg, social media promotion by Allison Harris, photos by Carlos Moreno and Julie Denechet, artwork by Krista Henthorn, music from Blue Dot Sessions and Jay-Z. Special thanks this episode to Geneviève Desmarteau, Lisa Rodriguez, Holly Edgell, the podcast Open Mic, and KMBC for the video from the day Lamonte McIntyre was released. Overlooked is part of the NPR Podcast Network. For more information on this case, along with photos, evidence, and documents, go to kcur.org/overlooked.